thank you so much for coming to see this presentation. We're going to look at how technology can be used in formative assessments. And particularly we asked a few questions. So should formative assessment be about more than just ensuring that learners are test ready? Is a question that we're going to have a look at today. How can technology support us to understand the knowledge, the skills, and importantly the behaviour adoption that happens through our learning programmes? How can technology-enabled formative assessments be used as an engagement tool as well as a feedback tool? And how much through the online journey can that online journey actually be impacted by the formative assessment results? And finally, has an over-reliance on multiple choice given formative assessments a bad name within learning technologies? So thank you for attending. I'm Hayley Khan. I work for Virtual College and I'm a solutions lead there. So I work with clients from the very start of the project when they're just starting to work out what they're doing with their learning programs, right through the learning strategy stage. Mike is from DPG. He is one of our clients. Do you want to say who you are and what you do?
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. As Hayley's just said, I'm going to bring some of the things that Hayley's talking about to life and the way in which we partner with Virtual College to approach our formative assessment in a really unique way.
So when we were asked to come up with our seminar topics way before Christmas, I actually really struggled with coming up with what we're going to talk about. We're in learning technologies and there is so much fantastic technology around this room. And I thought that will really draw the crowds talking about virtual reality and augmented reality and games-based learning. But actually I thought I'm going to take a step back and what do my customers talk to me about? And a big challenge that we've had is how we have that continual assessment strategy running throughout our online programs. So I thought before we get carried away with whatever technology we layer over the top of our solutions, let's really think about the bread and butter of learning design. And because we are all here to change knowledge, skills and behaviours, that's what we're trying to do. Now whether you use video or games-based learning or something really simple like articulate storyline, actually you're trying to do something and have an output either as knowledge, skills or behaviour. And that's not the technology that does that, it's the learning design that sits underneath. So why formative assessment? Well, I've had the pleasure of working with lots of qualification providers over the last 12 to 18 months. And we've been working on qualification delivery right from level 2 through to postgraduate qualifications. DPG are one of the organisations we've been working with. And formative assessment has been at the forefront of those discussions. We're also working with a lot of learning providers at the moment and employers looking at the apprenticeship reforms and looking at how, with the move to endpoint assessment, how learning providers and employers are going to feel confident about putting their learners forward for that endpoint assessment and how they can be ensured that that's going to be an endpoint assessment that is a success for them and for the apprentice. And then finally, at the Learning and Performance Institute judging, we were questioned about our formative assessment and how we use that within e-learning, and rightly so. And the statement was, please tell us you don't use multiple choice. And I thought, I get why, I completely understand it. But then I thought, oh, I know the answer that he wants me to give, that it's not a well-received type of assessment. But then I did think, hand on heart, can any e-learning designer say that they never use multiple choice? So why is that? Is it because multiple choice is a really useful assessment format which helps us understand a student's knowledge? Is it an easy option for e-learning designers and developers? Maybe read lazy rather than easy, I'll leave that up to you. Is it because it makes marking less labour intensive for teachers or tutors? Is it because it actually makes assessment really reliable and consistent across user groups? Or is it in fact all of the above? I would argue that it's lazy use of mechanisms, ways of using formative assessment, such as all of the above, that have actually given it a really bad name. Because it isn't inherently a bad format, and we're going to come on to different ways that we've used it and really successfully. But it is, all of the above is an easy mechanism. Those lazy ways are really easy of getting an assessment into your e-learning. But is it a formative assessment at all? Or is it in fact just a page type that's available in lots of tools like Captivate and Articulate, and you use it to break up the learning. You use it as an engagement tool. You use it actually to help learners to understand where they are on the journey and that they're closing down a particular topic, rather than actually part of a longer or more in-depth formative assessment strategy. And when I started in e-learning, every page was hand-done. There weren't tools that we were using with page types that you could just quickly replicate. And I think as we've got more and more reliant on tools, we're seeing more of this lazy instructional design creeping in, and it's actually giving the strategy behind it a bad name. So I also mentioned that we've spent quite a lot of time on the apprenticeship reforms, and we're working with a number of providers to look at how we get blended solutions to employers under the new apprenticeship reforms. And actually, however you feel about the apprenticeship reforms, and there are lots of strong views about them, the framework of moving from the frameworks with very structured tasks that you tick off, activities that you tick off, to this more holistic approach of looking at knowledge, skills and behaviours, are much more adaptable to different industries, to different personalities, to different individuals who actually are doing different jobs on a day-to-day basis. So one of the providers we're working with said our apprentices should not come out of the programme as the same person. We are developing them as individuals as well as employees. And actually I thought it's really quite an interesting statement. It was a one-off line in a meeting. And I thought, if we take that approach out of qualification delivery and into our corporate learning programs, actually, is that a better way of hooking the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? So what knowledge do these learners need at the end? What skills do we want them to have? And perhaps really importantly, what behaviours do we want them to exhibit? And if we start at the end and work out those things in our summative assessment, whether that's a one-off or over the next 18 months in business improvement, we then go back a stage, look at our formative assessment and how we're getting people ready to do that once the learning's finished, and then we look at our learning strategy. So I think if by working in reverse, it does give us a really good framework within which to pin our learning design. So what am I defining formative assessment? And when I was going through this, it struck me that actually maybe there is so much bad press about how technology is used because we're not being consistent with what we're calling challenges, quizzes, formative assessment, summative assessment. And when I started looking into it, there were so many definitions out there and so many different opinions and people having memes on all sorts of different subjects around formative assessment. So I picked a few to share with you, and I won't read them all, but I will pick out a couple. So a process that is used to modify teaching and learning to improve attainment. So it's that modify that I think is really interesting and that we really need to think about. Formative assessment isn't the quiz, it's what happens after. And I think that is also really important because it is very easy to mistake that challenge as your assessment strategy. An assessment should not be an event, it needs to happen continuously, it needs to inform our teaching. But with online, the process of getting feedback and adapting is a challenge in itself because you don't have a teacher there often who is there to modify their approach. So we're going to share some projects that we've worked on, one being the HR qualifications with DPG, and how we have worked on blended programs and online programs with a formative assessment strategy that is at the heart of our learning strategy. So we worked on a program with JISC, who I'm sure lots of you are aware of, and their challenge was that they wanted to develop level 2 hairdressing resources for work-based learners and classroom-based learners in any college, social housing provider, council, up and down the country. So all of those training providers were going to be using these resources, but clearly in very different ways because their learners are going to be different learners. So the strategy that we took was to develop a really flexible approach to the learning design. All of the learning content, knowledge content, which was video content, was chunked up into small 3-minute pieces that could be pieced together into a longer program. But then the assessment, which is all formative because they're going on to do their final qualification assessment, their assessment is all chunked up as well into small bite-sized elements that means that they can use them really flexibly. So we did include multiple choice, I will put that out there right now, with some of these screens with feedback. We also provided exercises that were meant for more class discussion or group discussion. So the idea was that it provoked thought, and then they would reveal the answers. And this could be done as a facilitated session with a tutor or a teacher, or with an employer in the workplace, or as group work. We also brought in the idea that for those learners that actually needed a stretch challenge, that the formative assessment was a good place to do that. So if you're getting a lot of correct answers, actually this is the point where you can add in additional information that might not be the core learning that they need to do, but if they're performing really well, they can go that extra step and start to have some more information. But actually, formative assessment is really useful, yes, for us as educators, but really useful for students to know where they're up to as well. So we do provide at the end of each one an overall percentage of how they have scored, and if they're not doing well, they can go back and they can try and get their score up. In a classroom situation, it's worked well in terms of getting groups to compete with their scores and getting them to be increased. But that's a blended learning program, and we still rely somewhat on the tutors to be recognizing strengths, weaknesses. And so we worked with Tech Partnership, and this was a very different project. It was a level 3 qualification, and actually all aimed at adult learners. So whether they were retraining, at risk of redundancy, setting up their own businesses, but adult learners who had a skill set before coming to us, and they were cross-skilling. So we decided that the formative assessment and the learning strategy had to be so interlinked that all of the learning was done through feedback. Adults learn really well through what works well, what doesn't work well, getting things right. So the whole of the content, there's 27 modules, are based around different scenarios and how you as an individual put their digital strategy online, so whether you use Facebook, LinkedIn, and we build it up. So the learning is going through the feedback throughout. So very simple in design, but contextualized examples. We also enabled adult learners, so when they were looking at a course such as developing your digital business objectives, we enabled adult learners to assess the skills that they had, and we provided recommendations for their learning. So we're starting to move into that point of personalized learning journeys, so individuals can recognize their strengths, their weaknesses, and start to tailor their experience based on the output that they're getting. But those are qualifications that are blended. So I'm going to pass on to Mike, who has said he's from DPG. They are CIPD HR qualification experts, and we met here at Learning Tech a year ago, and they came to us with the challenge of putting the level 5 HR management course online, a big part of which was the formative assessment scenarios. So I will hand over.
Thank you very much. You know, that's really scary that 12 months ago we had initial conversations.
Yeah.
In that 12 months we've essentially created from almost scratch a 7 to 8 month diploma program for a HR qualification at level 5. So it's a testament to how quickly we've been able to do that. And it's sometimes quite difficult to get excited about formative assessment, but this project is something that we've been really excited about, and the way in which we've approached it, we kind of have gathered the feedback so far, and it's really hitting the mark in how we can bring to life the content so that people are applying what they are learning in a way, in a context that they can apply right back in the workplace. And for a HR professional or an L&D professional who needs to sort of understand what they're learning and then apply it in their own workplace has been quite a challenge for us. Our background is blended learning, so we deliver blended learning qualifications where there is a heavy element of workshop-based delivery. So a lot of the formative assessments, a lot of the discussions, a lot of the content that's discussed takes place in that workshop. So our challenge when we started working with virtual colleges, how do we take those discussions, how do we take that formative assessment element where people can really pull apart the content into an online format and in an online way? So one of the things that DPG was really good at is we already use case studies and scenario-based learning. However, at each program, we only had one case study organisation. At level 3, it was manufacturing. At level 5, it was hospitality. And at level 7, it was a nursery organisation, which was great. But some of the feedback that we were getting was, well, what if I sit out of that sector? What if I sit out of that industry? I'm not really, yeah, I get it, your principles are the same, but it's not really helping me connect. So one of the challenges was, well, how do we actually approach this and put the learner at the heart of this experience? And what we came up with collectively was this concept of an interactive online business district. And the individual going through the program would join a consultancy, and they would work with different clients in this business district. And this is where Virtual College really helped us with the strategy around how we can link our content to the formative assessments, but do it in such a way that it feels a really compelling and immersive experience. So this was the sort of design strategy. So Hayley mentioned before that we need the strategy first before we can start to bring that to life. And when you look at it on paper, it's pretty uninspiring. Okay, you've got your building blocks, you've got your overview of what you're actually going to cover, you've got your live introduction, you've got your units, you've got your building blocks of content, and then the key thing there is formative assessment, which comes before a formal assessment brief and then a final assessment, in which, from a CIPD qualification perspective, means that you've got to hit certain criteria and demonstrate your knowledge and capability to meet the appropriate qualification marks, whether it's at level 3, level 5, or level 7. So level 5 is really strategic. So how can we help people apply what they're learning in a way in which they can then pretty much transfer that to the final summative assessment? So the formative assessment was a huge part in this. And the way in which we approached it was with a lot of fun and a lot of creativity. And I guess this is one of the reasons why it's been such a success, is because what Virtual College have brought to DPG is their online expertise and helping us understand, actually, you do this really well, and this is how it can translate across into an online world. And the characters and the backstories that have been created to support this have been really, really compelling. So this is Becky. So Becky is the CEO of Zip HR, and Zip HR is the client consultant who essentially has lots of different areas in the business district that focus on retail, logistics, focus on healthcare, focus on public sector, focus on hospitality, and we've built a lot of the things that we're really good at, but been able to do that in an online way that takes people through this journey. And you mentioned multiple choice before. This is an element of multiple choice, but done in such a way that it really puts the learner in control of how they're applying what they're learning, with effects on how they actually perform in the business district. So these were the case studies, these were the backstories that we created. Each one has got a central character, and Becky introduces that character to the person in the business district. So for Hell's Kitchen, which is completely fictitious, has no relation to anything that you may or may not have seen on television, is a case about employment law, and it's a social media issue, and the HR consultant needs to go in there, deep dive what the issues are, and help the client understand what they can and can't do, and advise on a course of action. Baker's department store looks at reward management and helping them create a performance management strategy that really works. And again, you'll meet Fred Baker, who introduces what they've got to do, presents them with the content, and then allows them to go away and make recommendations on what they think is right. Heritage Textiles, BCB Finance, and City College all have really compelling backstories that puts the HR individual at the centre of that organisation as a working member of the team, and ultimately somebody who has an impact on the reputation of that consultancy in the business district. So we're bringing in sort of game elements, game mechanics to make it even more immersive. So the business district is interactive. You can go into these different areas, and Virtual College were able to help us bring that to life. So it's not just something that's static on a page. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can explore, you can deep dive into it as much or as little as you like. So this is Roger, the HR manager at Baker's. So Roger will introduce you to his team, his characters that he's got in his team, what he's trying to achieve as a result of that. And then Roger will essentially send you off to explore, to go and process some content, to take different activities and exercises. Some of that will be live supported through webinars or virtual classrooms. Others will be supported by e-learning, again designed by Virtual College. and the level of depth that it goes into to help people understand the issues that are going on in these organisations, as I say, really put the learner like they've got a vested interest in this. And this is where the formative assessment for us has really come alive, and where we've got fantastic feedback, because it's helping people translate essentially what can be quite difficult content and quite dull content at times into a way that helps them understand what it means for them in their organisation, in a job and role that they do. And these are some examples of how elements of multiple choice have been evolved, I think is probably the way in which we could say, to ensure that whatever they choose there will take them into another area where the way in which they've answered has a direct impact on how they do. And at this point, I'm going to hand back to Hayley to talk about some of the feedback that we've got.
Yeah, so we've got around 70 learners on program already. So within a year, we've got CIPD accredited, and we've recruited 70 learners to go through the qualification. So we're early days, but we've pulled off the initial feedback. And there's some things in there which you'll see from every e-learning provider is a great experience, nice visuals. But I would like to draw your attention particularly to these 3 pieces of feedback that we've pulled off. So a formative assessment doesn't get a lot of feedback. It's not that a learner knows that they're going through it and they don't necessarily have a comment on it. But what we've got here is some direct feedback relating to how we went through that process, and actually validating that the decisions we made up front through the technology have had the desired impact. So the scenarios help you to begin breaking down a particular issue and think about the steps that are needed to resolve it, preparing you to put this into writing when it comes to your assessment. That's great. They understand that we are trying to help them to go through their summative assessment. But more than that, the scenarios within the business districts are very realistic and can be related to my role within HR, reflecting issues often found within the workplace. Because we don't want learners who pass a test and forget about what they're doing. We want learners who pass a test and then understand how to put their knowledge, their skills and their behaviours into practice for the long term, for the benefit of the organisation. So this is a formative assessment that is being used in lots of different ways. It is being used to tailor learning to improve attainment. It is so much more than that. It is an integral part of the learning design that we are using to develop the skills, the knowledge and the behaviours. It is a learner-centric engagement tool that's being used within both this learning environment but also more widely within the communities that DPG are creating through the system. It is a mechanism to help learners develop critical thinking skills that are helping them to pass their summative assessment. It's helping them to think in a different way when they're dealing with challenges outside of the workplace. It is multiple choice, it is contextualized, it is developed, it is refined, and it's without A, B, or C, but it is in fact all of the above. So I would say that we're at Learning Tech and we're a technology provider, and I've been here talking about learning design for the last half an hour, but actually the learning design is so important. Technology enables us to push boundaries of what we can do with formative assessment, how we can gather data. Virtual reality and games-based learning enables us to collect so much more information about how a learner engages with different programs, about what they engage with what they don't, what decisions they make, how long it takes to make them, who they interact with online, who they don't if they work alone. It enables us to do all of that, but I'm going to be really honest and say the majority of my clients don't have the budget to do those types of learning programs for what they need to do. And it is our job as learning designers, as learning solutions providers, to find a compromise without compromising on that learning design and getting the achievement that you need to get from your learners. So I would finish by saying I believe firmly that formative assessment should be an integral part of your learning strategy when you're developing online solutions before you even touch what technology and what format you're going to use, because they'll lend themselves to different things. But actually we must demand more from the learning design and the way that we're using these tools. We must demand more from the individuals that are creating these and the collaboration and the possibility that we have in coming up with these formative assessment strategies. But let us not move away from the tools and the techniques that have made e-learning mainstream and popular and cost-effective, and something that we can stand in a room with every organisation coming saying, yeah, I'm engaging with e-learning, because that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So let's not turn our back on those technologies. It is our use of the technology within the learning that will make our learning programs a success. That's all from us. If you've got any questions, we'll be happy to take them or speak afterwards.